What's up guys, Tim Little. Welcome back to Tactical Bassin. Today's video, we are talking about my top 5 favorite baits for August. You know, summertime is kind of wrapping up. It is still super hot, but today we're covering my top 5 baits to catch them in the heat. Summertime bass fishing is some of the best fishing of the entire year, especially if you like reaction fishing or power fishing. You know, August can be tough, right? It is hot. It's probably the second hottest month of the entire year, you know, right behind July. And if you guys haven't already, go and watch Matt's video that he did. I'll leave a link to it right up here, that he did his top 5 baits in July, because a lot of this information, a lot of his information still applies in my video. But August is a little tricky because you're kind of, summertime is coming to an end. Even though it is still hot out, you start getting those cooler nights, and you have to really pay attention to that, because that leads to your grass dying off and those fish really starting to leave their summer haunts, their summer areas they were, and start that fall transition. But we're not going to get into that yet. But August, it's hot out. Let's talk about my top 5 baits. And you know, this is really hard to do, really hard to narrow down, because you think about all the different types of fisheries, all different fisheries around the country, and it's like, how do you just pick 5? But I'm going to try and simplify it for you, and then I'll give you my top 5 baits for like your traditional summertime bass fishing. You know, your typical fishery, grass, shallow, deep, that sort of stuff. And then I will give you kind of the another group of baits, another 5 baits per se, for like your clear water, highland reservoir fisheries, maybe your fisheries up north, up there in Michigan, New York, that sort of stuff. So we'll start off with the my 5 traditional favorite baits for August, and then we'll move into that secondary group. So starting off, number 1, let's talk topwater. You know, like I said, it's really hard to narrow it down to just 5 baits. So I do have 5 categories. Topwater, my number 1 bait is going to be a frog. You know, summertime fishing, when you think topwater fishing, you think grass, heavy vegetation. You know, what's going on in your fisheries in August? Let's talk about that first real quick. You know, like I said, the nights are getting a little bit cooler, but it is really that last month, kind of the end of summer. So you're still hot. Middle of the day is really hot, scorching temps, and those fish are tired of it, right? They've had all summer to have to deal with that hot water temp. You know, now you start to get into that lower dissolved oxygen. You get less oxygen in the water, and you need to be fishing cover. Grass if you're up shallow, you know, rock if you're out deep. You need to be fishing structure. And if you're fishing shallow, like that heavy vegetation, that provides those fish the best areas to ambush from, to feed up in, and really to get that oxygen. You know, that grass really filters that water and puts a lot of oxygen back in that water. So as those water temps climb throughout the summer, those fish get more and more lethargic and less oxygen in the water. So you want to be you know, really mindful of that, and pick your times you fish. You know, low light conditions early in the morning, low light in the evening can be great, because those cooler water temps, cooler air temps. But midday, it's really going to congregate those fish. And we'll talk about some of the highland reservoir stuff, maybe fishing some bluff walls, some shade lines here in a bit. But let's talk about your traditional frog fishing, heavy vegetation. You're going to be throwing this stuff in the thickest grass. You know, that could be your grass mats, your cheese, way back into like your bulrushes or reeds, that sort of stuff. Those fish are gonna get all the way back in that thickest cover to get in that shaded water, cooler water, that dark water. That's the stuff you wanna be throwing your top water in. So how could you pass up a frog? You know, really easy to throw this stuff into that thick cover. You're fishing heavy braided line, 50, 60 pound braided line. You're throwing it on a really powerful rod, real heavy action, and like I said, power on power, that braid. So my number 1 bait for summertime fishing, if I'm throwing a reaction bait on topwater, is gonna be the frog. Number 2, you know, I switched it up a little bit. Like I said, Matt's video, he was awesome talking about that July stuff, talking about a swim jig. Now for me, I didn't want to do a duplicate video, although a lot of the stuff that he talked about would be my number ones, but one that I wanted to switch up primarily for grass fishing and then your highland reservoir, your clear water fishing, is going to be a jerk bait. You know, I don't typically throw a California swim jig in clear water a lot unless I'm striper fishing, but it works. For me, a jerk bait. Now we're talking about kind of that transition, the middle to end of August, as those water temps are cooling down, those fish are starting to school up, those bait fish are starting to get balled up, and a jerk bait, especially in open water, can be lights out. But since we're talking about the traditional fisheries, we're still talking grass, and it's really hard to beat a soft plastic jerk bait up in that thick stuff. The same, you know, not necessarily the real heavy like timber and that sort of stuff that you'd throw the frog in, but that grass, that real thick vegetation, a Fluke or some kind of soft plastic jerk bait, rigged weedless, is really hard to beat because you can fish it 2 primary ways. Fire it out there, skip, get that thing dancing all over the surface. We've talked a lot about these in recent videos. I've done a lot of videos on topwater fluke fishing, but you can fish it like a fleeing bait fish through and over the top of those same grass mats that you're fishing the frog in. But number 2, you can fish this down through it. You can put a little tungsten nail weight in there in the head if you want. You can put a weighted swim bait hook on there, you know, some kind of twist lock, a weighted twist lock hook, or you can just rig it like that with no weight at all and just let it fall through those holes in the grass. But when you rip that stuff out, when you rip that fluke out of that stuff, that thing is jumping up and dancing all around like a fleeing bait fish, and you can really get those fish that were in that heavy cover to come out and eat that soft plastic jerk bait. So a Fluke is gonna be my number 2. Again, you're gonna fish it just like you would, you know, around the same type of stuff as you would that frog, but it's a little bit different presentation, and a lot of guys aren't throwing a Fluke like that. All right, number 3. Now this one was really hard to try and get away from just because it is so universal. You know, all the different types of fisheries, you could fish some kind of Texas rig. Now, so that's gonna be my number 3. Now a Texas rig is just what it seems. It's a bait that's skin hooked back into itself, so it's rigged weedless. Typically, you can throw your stick baits Texas rigged. You can throw real heavy flipping setups, your punching setups. You're gonna find that thick cover. Again, talking thick vegetation, and you're gonna punch that stuff with 3/4 ounce, 1.5 ounce tungsten weights to a Texas rig. But you can also downsize your weight, do light flipping, but it's just very, very universal. You could throw a Texas rigged worm, but a Texas rig in these conditions on that traditional bass fishing lake, a Texas rig weedless, either a worm or some kind of creature bait, is gonna be my number 3. Shallow fish, we know that half the fish stay shallow, half the fish go deep, and these first 3 techniques are some of my favorite ways to catch them when they're up shallow in that grass, in that vegetation. Again, light flipping, heavy flipping, weightless Senko on big fluorocarbon or braid to big mono leader, flipping those same grass patches, those same laydowns, that sort of stuff with a Texas rig. You can't pass this up in summertime. So August, going with the frog, going with the Fluke, and I'm going with some kind of Texas rig bait. So those first 3 baits really kind of covered my shallow, heavy vegetation techniques. So those baits right there, the frog, the Fluke, and the Texas rig, all 3 of those, you're gonna use different ways to get those fish out of that heavy vegetation, out of that thick cover to commit to your bait. Now let's talk about the fish that went deep. Now this next one, again, I know Matt went with a shaky head in his video. It's really hard to beat a shaky head. You know, we've done videos in the past where we've tried to catch 100 fish in a day, and it was all on a shaky head, and it worked. June bug shaky head is an awesome bait. But if you guys like to drop shot, this made my list because it applies to me to more fisheries. If I'm fishing different lakes in the month of August around the country, a drop shot is going to be more versatile to me than the shaky head. Yes, you could catch fish around the world on a shaky head in the month of August, but a drop shot, you know, you can power shot it. You can see how I have it rigged right here. I have this rigged, again, weedless, a lot like that Texas rig. Get this up close for you guys. So if I'm fishing shallow, or you're a shallow water fisherman, now you can flip docks, you can flip around the edges of the grass line, and you can throw this stuff right in that thick cover and get those fish. Now, if I'm going to be fishing a Clearwater reservoir or Highland reservoir or lake up in the northeast corner of the United States, then I'm going to go with an exposed hook. I'll talk about that here shortly. But my number 4 bait for this time of year is going to be some kind of drop shot. Now you can drop shot a creature bait, you could drop shot, you know, your favorite soft plastics. I like to throw a 6 or a 7-inch worm, but a drop shot for me is gonna make the lineup. All right, number 5. Again, guys, this was really hard to just condense, to try and pick out 5 baits that will work around the country this time of the year. Again, that water, the water temps are up, that oxygen is down. Those fish don't really want to, they don't want to chase a lot unless they're in deeper water. You know, they go deeper to get to that cooler water. Maybe you're on a current system like the TVA, or you're fishing something that has dams at both ends, so you have water coming in, water going out, so you have some water movement. Those fish are going to go deeper. Those fish that stay shallow, that's where that oxygen level really gets low in the heat of the day. So if I am going to be fishing deep, you cannot leave home without some kind of deep diving crankbait. That's that DT16, that's that Rapala. You know, it's, when I say deep, I think of anything deeper than 12 feet per se. So 12 to like 25, 30 feet. I'm typically gonna be fishing either that drop shot or some kind of deep diving crankbait. Maybe it's a 10XD or 6XD or that DT14 or 16, something like that, that's gonna really target those fish in that deeper water. You know, those fish that go deep, they're out there on the ledges, they're out there on the current breaks, the current seams, they're out there on your high spots, out there in the main body, your rock piles, that sort of stuff. Those fish go deeper to get into that cooler water, and that's where they're gonna stay until fall time, when those fish start schooling up and really start pushing bait shallow. But in August, do not leave home without some kind of deep diving crankbait if you plan on fishing deep. You know, reaction fish, again, especially out here on the TVA, you're looking for those schools, you're looking for those fish that are out there on those ledges, they're wanting to feed up. And that's gonna go here probably for another month or so, and then we'll really start talking about the fall transition and where those fish start to move and where they're gonna go into that winter transition. So kind of going through the different seasons for you. But number 5 is gonna be some kind of deep diving crankbait. So now that we talked about the top 5 for the traditional bass lake per se, you know, the traditional heavy cover, up shallow fishing, let's talk about your northern fisheries, your clear water fisheries, highland reservoirs, that sort of thing. Now, I went with the same techniques, but I'm going with different baits. So in that traditional type of fishery, I'm going with a frog. If I'm talking about a lake up north, or I'm talking about a highland reservoir with clear water, I am going with a walking topwater. Now, the reason being, these fish are all about cover. Like I said, those shallow fish are up in that real thick vegetation. Clear water fish, they are looking for shade lines. They're looking for cover, so either houseboats or marinas, that sort of stuff where they can get back underneath it. But let's talk about shade lines, because these come into play a lot in August. You know, as that sun is hot, that sun is high, look for shade lines near your shoreline. So let's talk bluff walls. So say you're up a river arm somewhere on a highland reservoir, and you have some really steep canyons and you have some bluff walls. The higher that sun gets, that shade line gets smaller and smaller and smaller on the bluff line, that bluff wall. A lot of times those shade lines are less than 3 feet. So that really positions those fish right up against that wall, and they'll be suspended on that wall sometimes over 100 feet. So this topwater bait right there, you don't want to come away from that shade line too quickly. So you want to fire right, you want this bait to touch that wall on your cast, and you want to walk this thing side to side in that shade line. You don't want this bait to leave that shade line, because that is where you're gonna get bit. So I'm not going whopper plopper unless I can run something parallel. I'm going with something that I could twitch, twitch, twitch. So a walking topwater bait. That's where it's gonna change from the frog to this guy right here. Number 2, talked about the Fluke. In these same conditions, but in those types of fisheries, I'm gonna go with a normal jerkbait. This is the Megabass 110 plus 1. You can go with that 110 Junior plus 1, plus 2, depending on the depth of your fish, some kind of jerkbait. Again, these fish are starting to get, especially early morning, late in the evening, with those water temps and air temps down, those fish are gonna get a little bit more active. They're gonna start thinking about chasing those schooling fish. So a jerkbait, work that thing real aggressive, pop, 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 let it sit, pop, 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 let that thing dive all over the place and get those fish to chase it down. Those fish that are up shallow, up in that vegetation, they're not really gonna wanna chase too much, but some of these reservoirs, deeper water, clear water, gonna be a little bit lower water temps, better oxygen level, so these fish are gonna be more aggressive and more apt to chase a jerkbait. Number 3 is gonna be a swim bait. So I went away from the Texas rig because I feel like those clear water fisheries, you have a better shot catching fish this time of the year with the swim bait. It doesn't matter if it's some kind of underspin on a 3.8 swim bait or a weedless underspin on like a beast hook, or for you northern guys, or you fish, guys fishing lakes that have gobies and sculpin, some kind of dark sleeper. One of the 3, I'm gonna go with one. Typically if I'm fishing open water and I'm fishing like kind of those same fish for that jerkbait, I could fish a little deeper. I could fish those shallower suspended fish. I could fish those same fish up against the shade line on those bluff walls. I'm probably gonna go with an underspin. But if you are fishing around, say, standing timber, say you're in Texas, Ivy, Fork, something like that, where you're fishing standing timber, lots and lots of it, go weedless and go with that beast. But some kind of swim bait, and again, you northern guys, you don't leave home without that sleeper, but some kind of swim bait in August right now is gonna be my number 3 bait. Now last 2, number 4 is gonna be the drop shot. I talked about it a little bit with that traditional 5 baits, but some kind of drop shot. I'm gonna go an exposed hook though. Smallmouth fishery, spotted bass fishery, highland reservoir, I'm gonna be fishing deeper water. It's the same stuff I was targeting with that deep crankbait. Now I'm gonna be fishing slower, more methodical, but I'm gonna break it down and fish a drop shot. Same stuff, your rock piles out on main lake points, your ledges, your current seams, that sort of stuff. That is where, hands down, if I'm fishing clear water or some type of fishery like that, I'm going with the exposed hook drop shot. And then last but not least, rounding out those top 5, it doesn't matter what time of year it is, but the Ned Rig. Swagger tackle, that's that tungsten head, that's that Robo Ned bait right there, Margarita Mutilator. Some kind of Ned bait. If it does get scorching hot and the bite is just tough, go with the Ned Rig. You guys will have success when the other 4 baits won't put fish in the boat. That Ned Rig is going to be my number 5, and it is always with me no matter what type of fishery I am fishing, but especially if I'm fishing a Clearwater Reservoir, Highland Reservoir, or something up north, or Clearwater light line, a Ned Rig is always in the boat. So guys, there it is. There's my top 10 baits for August. Again, it is hot out. Pay attention to your overnight lows. Pay attention to your water temps and look for that really good vegetation up shallow. As we start to transition into September, we get closer to the end of August, some of that vegetation is going to start dying off, and that's when those fish are going to pull into the thicker, greener, liveliest grass, or they're going to start pulling off into that hard cover, that rock, the wood, that sort of stuff. So pay attention to where those fish are going, pay attention to your weather and everything going around with the conditions. But the baits themselves, I will link all of them down below in the video description. I will link my favorites in each of the categories and everything that we discussed. As always, guys, we appreciate you. Thanks for watching. If you like this video or learned something from it, give us a thumbs up. Remember to subscribe to our channel. We do a lot of videos a week, but we always do at least 3 Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But again, we appreciate you. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. We'll talk to you soon.